Okay, let's look at Uchi Gari. So, Uchi Gari is one of the highest scoring techniques at almost every level of judo competition, right away from beginners events to the IGF World Tour. And it's also a technique that I love to play an integral part of all of the players' attacking strategies that I work with as a coach. And although it seems a simple technique, it's essentially tripping your partner over. There's lots of things that go wrong with the technique when people are starting to learn it. So let's look at some of the really key points for an Uchi Gari. So again, I'm taking this grip where my hands are soft on my partner's kit. I'm not squeezing my hands completely tight, but I have got control. I can move my hands and I can adjust my partner's balance with my hands. I'm starting facing my partner, and again I'm starting with that dynamic posture, so my legs are a little bit flexed at the ankles, my head's looking straight at my partner. So we're talking about breaking the balance. Of course, we're throwing our partner to the rear, so we want to break their balance backwards. The way we start to do that is with the entry of the technique, is with me invading my partner's space. So I start by moving quickly towards my partner with my first step. When I do that, you'll notice that my partner's weight comes ever so slightly and subtly onto their heels. So instead of being central on their foot or on their toes, their weight's now on their heels. But it's not going to stay on their heels for long unless I do something with the upper body to control them. So my hands will start in front of their kit, but as I make the entry into the technique, they're going to slide over my partner's shoulder and round from their bicep to their tricep. So if you look at the sleeve hand, I'm going to start my Uchi Gari with my hand gripped in front of his bicep. When I start to enter the technique, I'm going to start to slide that hand behind their tricep. And that starts to trap the weight behind them, trap the weight on their heels. Similarly with my lapel hand, so on my lapel hand, I'm going to slide as I enter the technique, the lapel hand over their shoulder and then behind their shoulder. And if I do those two things at the same time, the sleeve hand from the bicep to the tricep, the lapel hand from in front of the chest to behind the shoulder, that will help me to lock my partner's weight behind their heels. So, the two things that are going to break my partner's balance is the speed that I enter the technique, which starts to break their balance slightly backwards, and me sliding my hands from in front of their torso to behind their torso. We'll just watch that once more. We'll see that the hands start in front and finish behind. So I create the right space. I start to enter the technique quickly. Hands slide over and behind. The other key points are really about the shape of my body in comparison to the shape of my partner's. So my body positioning. It's natural because we're sweeping or hooking or reaping, whichever you want to say with an Uchi Gari. It's natural because this leg is working for there to be a moment where my hips become slightly sideways on, a little bit like the letter T to my opponent. But to finish the technique with power and control, I need to try and make sure I finish with my hips square to my partner's hips and my shoulders square to my partner's shoulders. So if we just watch once more, watch the position that I land in. So you'll see my shoulders are square with my opponent's shoulders, my two hip bones are square with my opponent's hip bones. That means I'm controlling them all the way to the ground and ensuring I get an Ippon score. Okay, let's look at a couple of the common errors. So naturally, some of the errors are almost the opposite of some of the key points. So again, if I lock my hands too straight and too square, and I've got too tight a grip, it makes it very difficult for me to get close to my partner. If I'm not close to them, if I don't get my belt close to my partner's belt on the entry of the technique, I may be able to hook my partner's leg, but it'll be very easy for them to lift it off and hop away. So I must be relaxed enough in my arms that I can close the space on my partner. Have my belt close to my partner's belt. So, no rigid arms, no strong straight arms. If I do that, there's just too much space to make the technique effective. The next thing is if I leave my hands in front of my partner's torso, I may break their balance, I may get close to them, but with my hands in front of the torso, I'm actually keeping them on balance as I try to make the throw. My Uchi or my partner could probably hop like that for hours or days. So it's going to be very difficult to make a quick, effective throw. So we've got to try and make sure we get our hands behind and lock the weight behind our partner. If they're in front, it's very easy for my partner to stay on balance, and no matter what direction I change, they're probably going to be able to keep hopping around and evade the technique. Really important one to make sure we maximise our chance of scoring ippon and minimise our chance of being countered by our opponent when we're making the throw is this focus on the hips. If I allow my hips to stay sideways to my partner as I make the throw, I may knock my partner off balance. I may start to throw them. But the likelihood is, at the point I'm about to make the throw, they're going to counter me because I've put myself off balance, I've put myself in a compromised position. So a real big error we see a lot with Uchi Gari is people making the entry to the technique, then trying to throw with their hips sideways to their partner, looking like they're going to land on the side of our partner. Really good telltale sign for this when you're practicing it or drilling it with your partner. If your Uchi is being compliant and letting you throw, you might think that every time you do a throw it's perfect. But if I do a throw and recently lets me do my Uchi Gari, and when I finish, I can feel that I'm sideways onto him. Actually, this isn't a particularly good Uchi Gari. And in a randori situation, or a competition situation, it will more than likely lead to this. Which is not great for me. So, again, as in the good example, our hips are naturally going to have to turn a little when we enter the technique. But I'm going to work really hard to pull my hips square as I circle my foot to take my partner's leg away. Square hips, square shoulders with our partner. Okay, let's have a little quick look at what the foot does. If I make my circling motion to reap my partner's leg away and I slide my foot off the floor, this is probably the right height for the technique. So when you watch the foot, I'm circling close to the floor, take my partner's leg away. If I start to go too high, again, it makes it very difficult for me to pull my hips square, and I'm in this banana shape, which is really easy for my partner to counter. So we're with our foot, again, if you think about my hand being my foot, as I make my attack, I'm sliding my foot on the floor, and I'm collecting my partner's foot halfway round the circle and knocking it out to the side. So, at full speed. Final mistake is often, again, same as in some of our other techniques, really trying to rush the finish of the throw without being in the correct position to do so. So, if I sense that I've got at least a tiny bit off balance, and I try quickly to get them on the floor by bending down and pulling down, I compromise my own stance, my own posture. I send some of my body weight backwards because my bum goes out, and it becomes very difficult for me to control my partner, very easy for them to step off the technique. And what will often happen here is you will finish in this type of position where you're in front of your partner on your knees and your partner's stood over the top of you. Not a great attack from me, and an opportunity for my partner or my opponent to work in knee maza. combat that, we want to make sure we close distance well with our partner, and then we want to really readjust this back leg and making little driving steps to allow us to keep this contact, not allow our partner to get away, and control them all the way to the mat. Now, race is getting great Uchi for me and we starting relatively square. Sometimes we'll be in a situation where we're extreme, same side opponent, so right against right. Again, from this position it can be pretty difficult to make a successful Uchi Gari. If I try and make an Uchi Gari directly from here, I'm exaggerating this banana shape with my body. It's going to be very hard for me to successfully throw for Ippon, and it's going to be very easy for my opponent to counter me. So, I don't want to attack directly from here. I want to change the angle, I want to try and create, even if just for a millisecond, this more square position. Some of the ways I might do that, I might use my hands to push the sleeve and pull my partner's lapel, while also sliding my feet backwards. Very quickly, I've managed to make what was an extreme situation a more square situation. Again, if my opponent wants to be extreme, I might manage to square them up. If I don't do something quickly, we're going to be back in this situation again. So once I make the square, I'm making my attack nice and fast. Similarly, if I have an opposite sided opponent, it's going to be very difficult for me to make an effective Uchi Gari just from where I am. Really exaggerated this banana shape with my body, with my foot all the way back, my shoulder all the way back. I'm in almost no control of my opponent. Very easy for them to counter me. Quite often you'll see big spectacular counters from this type of position, where I go to meet the attack and my partner catches both feet and takes me off onto my back. So, again, not a position I want to be in. So in this extreme position, I want to try and create a square quickly to make my Uchi Gari. I may do it through my own movement. I may do it through moving my partner. But I've got to try and create that square position to make my Uchi Gari from. So the two main reactions we're going to get from our opponent when we try and do an Uchi Gari are probably a block or an evasion. A block, we can really try and nullify that by our preparation. If I don't prepare my attack well, if I don't break Reese's balance well when I do my attack, he's going to be able to block me. So if I just attack from here, there's a good chance that with his head above his shoulders above his hips and his hips above his feet, he's in a strong position to block. So he's going to be able to block me with his hips and his body, make it difficult for me to make the attack. If in my preparation I make sure I break his balance quickly onto his heels and then get his weight behind him, it's very difficult for someone to block you with their shoulders behind their hips, their head behind their shoulders, their hips behind their feet. So really the key to not getting this attack blocked is really good preparation of the attack and really quick breaking of your partner's balance. The more often, or the more likely reaction we'll get when your partner knows you do Uchi Gari is they'll start to evade it. So as soon as you start to make the shape and the movement for the technique, they're already thinking about stepping their leg away. When I do the attack, he starts to step his leg away. Now this obviously evades my Uchi Gari, but I can use this to my advantage in other ways. So, my philosophy on combinations in judo is there are generally two types of combination. There are actual combinations where we do one technique in its entirety and then we do a second technique in its entirety. That's an actual combination. One full technique into a second full technique. The higher up we go in judo, I think the less frequently we would see that type of combination, we're much more likely to see what I would call a threat combination. So the threat of the first technique gets a reaction from your partner. So I don't even need to do the first technique, it gets a reaction. Maybe this technique might get the reaction of my partner quickly stepping their leg away. So I make the threat, then I make my next attack. And with Uchi Gari, the options are almost limitless. You'll see some people doing a threat of Uchi Gari into Maroto Seinagi. You'll see some people doing the threat of Uchi Gari into Tai Toshi. And I'm sure most of you who have watched on the site will have seen the great Inui doing the threat of Uchi Gari into Uchimata. But the most important thing is to make the threat real and get a proper reaction from your partner. So, that's Uchi Gari, guys. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below the video. And if you want to develop your own style of Uchi Gari, of course, go and check all the Fighting Films Superstars.